Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The gray sky hung low over the small college town in Texas, drizzle whispering against cracked sidewalks as Mark Davis hurried down the street, his backpack heavy with textbooks and overdue bills. At 23, Mark was a final-year law student, working part-time at a gas station, drowning in debt his late father had left behind. Every step felt like walking deeper into quicksand. His phone buzzed in his pocket, slicing through the sound of distant traffic. Mark Davis speaking, he answered, his voice tired but polite. On the other end, a calm, authoritative woman spoke. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you. It concerns your financial situation." Mark stopped under a flickering street lamp, rain collecting on his sleeves. "I am sorry, who are you?" "How do you know about I know enough?" the voice interrupted smoothly. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m. It is important." Before he could reply, the line went dead. He stood there, confused and uneasy. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Brooks Bistro was a luxury cafe uptown, a place people like him only passed by, never entered. He almost ignored the call. But something in her Tonia quiet power made him go. By 7, the rain had grown heavier. Mark stepped inside the bistro, shaking off the chill. The lighting was warm, elegant, golden reflections dancing across glass and silver. In the far corner sat a woman in her early 70s, poised, confident, silver hair pinned perfectly in place, dressed in a tailored navy suit that radiated old money. "Mark," she greeted, gesturing for him to sit. Her voice was calm yet commanding. "You must be wondering why you are here." Mark hesitated before sliding into the chair opposite her. "Yes, ma'am. I do not understand. How do you even know me?" Eleanor Brooks lifted her cup of tea, studied him over the rim, and then set it down gently. "I know about your father's debts. I know your mother is ill.
I know you are 2 months behind on rent. You are running out of time, Mr. Davis. I can fix that." Mark blinked, stunned. "Fix it? How?" She folded her hands, her tone smooth and deliberate. "Marry me." The world seemed to pause. "I am sorry, what?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "You heard me. This is not about love. It is a business arrangement. You will be my husband, legally. I will clear every debt in your name, fund your mother's treatment, and ensure your financial stability. In return, you will provide companionship and discretion. Think of it as a contract, not a romance." Mark's heart pounded. It had to be a joke. "You do not even know me," he said, almost laughing. "Exactly," she replied. "That is what makes it simple. You are young, decent, unattached, and desperate enough to say yes. I have no family, no heirs, and too many vultures waiting for me to die. I need a name beside mine. On paper, someone I can trust to keep my affairs clean." Mark stood abruptly, the chair scraping the marble floor. "This is insane." Her eyes softened for the first time. "So it was losing everything I worked for to people who never cared about me. You have until tomorrow to decide. My driver will pick you up at noon if you choose yes." The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Mark left the bistro in a daze, the cold cutting through his jacket as he walked home. His mother was waiting in the dimly lit kitchen, her breathing shallow, worry etched into every line of her face. "Mark," she whispered when he told her what had happened, "I know it sounds unthinkable, but maybe this is not punishment, maybe it is a chance." Mark looked down at his trembling hands, feeling the weight of a decision that could change his life forever. The rain outside kept falling, steady and relentless, like the ticking of a clock counting down to midnight. The following morning, Mark barely slept. The sound of rain had quieted to a steady drizzle outside his window, but his mind was a storm that would not rest. The offer from Eleanor Brooks replayed in his head again and again. A contract marriage. It sounded insane, yet the promise of freedom from debt and his mother's hospital bills weighed heavier than reason. By 11:45, he was still pacing the kitchen when he heard the low hum of an engine outside. A black sedan idled by the curb. He looked at his mother.
Her frail hand reached across the table and covered his. "Whatever you choose," she whispered, "make sure it is for your own future, not just mine." Mark nodded slowly, grabbed his jacket, and stepped into the gray noon light. The driver, a quiet man in a black suit, opened the door without a word. The ride was silent, the city passing by like a muted film until they arrived at the gates of the Brooks estate. Iron bars, polished stone, and acres of manicured gardens framed a mansion that looked like something out of another century. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, gold fixtures, and walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow him. Eleanor waited in the grand foyer, dressed impeccably, her expression calm. "You came," she said simply. "I take that as your answer." Mark swallowed hard. "I need to know why." "Why me?" She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because you remind me of who I was before the money. You have nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and everything to prove. That makes you trustworthy." She led him into a private study where a lawyer was already waiting, pen poised above a stack of documents. "This is the agreement," Eleanor said, sliding it toward him. 6 months. No intimacy, no emotional involvement. Appear together at 5 public events. You will receive financial security and full coverage of your mother's medical care. In return, you will be my legal husband. Mark's eyes skimmed the fine print, his pulse quickening. Each clause was colder than the last, written in the language of business rather than affection. "And after 6 months?" he asked. "We part ways quietly," she said. "You walk away debt-free. I retain control of my estate." Simple. He exhaled slowly. His hand trembled as he signed his name. Eleanor nodded to the lawyer, who collected the papers and left. "Very well," she said. "The ceremony will be private, tomorrow morning." The next day was a blur. A courthouse, a judge, 2 witnesses who barely looked up from their papers. When the words, "You may now exchange vows," were spoken, Eleanor met his gaze with cool composure. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis." Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes flickered an emotion too quick to name. That night, as they arrived at the estate, the enormity of it all sank in. The mansion was vast, echoing, almost empty.
The staff greeted him with polite smiles, their eyes curious but cautious. "Your room is down the west wing," Eleanor said as they climbed the marble staircase. "Dinner is at 7 sharp. I expect punctuality." Her tone was professional, not unkind, but distant. Mark nodded, feeling like an employee rather than a husband. His room was larger than his entire apartment, furnished with antiques, a king-sized bed, and windows overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. Yet despite the luxury, it felt cold like a museum where time had stopped. He unpacked his single suitcase and stared at his reflection in the mirror. A law student turned contract husband. How had his life twisted into this? At dinner, Eleanor sat at the far end of a long table, the chandelier casting a golden glow between them. The meal was exquisite, but silence filled the space heavier than the air itself. Halfway through, she glanced up. "You will attend a charity gala with me next week," she said. "I assume you can manage a tuxedo?" Mark nodded. "I will find one." "Good," she said, returning to her meal. The conversation ended as quickly as it began. After dinner, he wandered the halls alone, the ticking of an antique clock echoing through the stillness. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. He thought of his mother, her warm smile, the way she had told him to fight for his future. He looked around at the mansion's grandeur and whispered to himself, "Then I guess this is where the fight begins." The storm rumbled again, and somewhere in the house, a door creaked, as if the old walls themselves had just begun to breathe. The first week of marriage felt like a transaction unfolding in real time. Mark followed the routine laid out in Eleanor's precise scheduled: breakfast at 8, meetings with her lawyer, etiquette coaching, and silent dinners at the long mahogany table. Every conversation was measured, professional, and wrapped in polite distance. He quickly learned that Eleanor Brooks ran her home the same way she ran her empire, with structure, control, and zero tolerance for chaos. The staff obeyed her every command, moving through the house like quiet ghosts. Despite the grandeur, the mansion carried a strange loneliness, an emptiness that echoed through its halls.
One evening, as he passed the library, Mark heard faint music playing, a slow piano melody drifting from behind the half-open door. Curious, he peered inside. Eleanor sat alone, her silver hair softly illuminated by lamplight, a glass of red wine beside her. Her eyes were closed, her fingers tapping the rhythm against her knee. For a brief moment, she looked almost human, tired, fragile, and heartbreakingly alone. She sensed his presence and turned. "You can come in," she said, her tone neutral but not cold. Mark hesitated before stepping forward. "I did not know you liked music," he said quietly. "I used to play," she replied. "Before business swallowed everything else." She took a sip of wine, studying him. "You look uncomfortable." "I suppose I am," he admitted. "This place feels too perfect. Like no one really lives here." A faint smile curved her lips. "That is the point, Mr. Davis. Perfection leaves no room for mess. Or for pain." Her words lingered in the air long after he left the room. Over the next few days, their interactions shifted subtly. During breakfast, she asked about his studies. During an evening walk through the gardens, she shared a story about her late husband, a brilliant financier who had died suddenly 2 decades ago. "He left me with everything but peace," she said softly, her gaze distant. For the first time, Mark saw something beneath her composed exterior: grief. At the upcoming charity gala, he was expected to play the role of the devoted husband. Eleanor arranged for a tailor to visit the estate. As Mark stood still while measurements were taken, she gave him a set of rules. "Smile when necessary. Speak only when spoken to. Do not contradict anyone in my circle. Appear calm, confident, and uninterested in gossip. The less they know, the longer they will believe." "Believe what?" he asked. "That this marriage is real," she said without looking up. The gala arrived on a Saturday night. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and crystal, the air perfumed with wealth and whispers. Mark's tuxedo fit perfectly, though he felt like an imposter wearing it. Cameras flashed as Eleanor made her entrance, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She smiled for the crowd, a flawless, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. They mingled with politicians, bankers, and old friends who praised her resilience.
Every word was diplomacy, every laugh rehearsed. Mark did his part, staying close, polite, silent. But he noticed something whenever people spoke to Eleanor. Their smiles carried envy, not admiration. They feared her more than they respected her. During dinner, one of the board members leaned toward him and whispered, "So, you are the lucky one. How much did it cost you to earn her signature?" The words hit like a slap. Mark forced a smile and said nothing. Eleanor's hand tightened slightly on his arm under the table. She had heard. Later that night, in the car ride home, silence hung heavy between them. Rain streaked the windows again, the same way it had the day they met. Finally, she spoke. "You handled yourself well tonight. Is that a compliment or a test?" he asked. "Both," she said simply. When they reached the mansion, she paused at the foot of the stairs. "Good night, Mr. Davis." Her tone was formal again, but her eyes lingered a second longer than before. Alone in his room, Mark loosened his tie and stared out at the storm. Somewhere in that thunderous sky, he sensed that the contract they had signed was beginning to mean something neither of them had planned. He whispered to himself, maybe perfection is not what she needs. Maybe it is someone who will stay. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, like a promise that the story between them was only beginning. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the mansion began to shift. What had once been silent corridors now carried the faint sound of conversation, cautious laughter, and the clink of shared coffee cups in the mornings. Eleanor and Mark still kept their distance, but something intangible had changed. She no longer treated him like a signed contract, and he no longer looked at her as a transaction. One morning, he found her in the greenhouse, trimming roses with delicate precision. The sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, painting her face in soft gold. "You are up early," he said, stepping inside. She smiled faintly. "Discipline never sleeps. Or maybe you just do not like silence," he replied. Her hand paused midair, then continued cutting. "You are learning," she said softly. He helped her gather the cut flowers, arranging them into a vase. For the first time, they worked side by side without walls between them. That evening, Eleanor surprised.
"We are visiting my late husband's memorial foundation tomorrow," she said. "You should come." The following day, they drove to the city, the car slicing through morning fog. The foundation building was modern and elegant, filled with photographs of children's programs and scholarships. As they walked through the halls, employees greeted Eleanor with respect. Mark watched her interact with the staff, calm and commanding, but her eyes softened each time she looked at the portraits of children on the wall. "This was his dream," she said quietly. "I just kept it alive." Mark hesitated before asking, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Choosing business over love." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You assume I had a choice." The answer stayed with him the rest of the day. That night, the air in the mansion felt different, heavy, almost electric. Thunder rolled in the distance as rain began to fall again. Mark was reading in his study when a soft knock came at the door. Eleanor stood there, her usually perfect hair slightly undone, her voice low. "The storm knocked out the power. The generator is delayed. May I come in?" He nodded. They sat near the window, candles flickering between them. "You are very quiet tonight," she said. "I am just thinking," he replied. "About what?" "About how two people can share the same house and still feel like strangers." She looked into the candlelight, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe we both forgot how to let anyone in." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain grew heavier, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand, accidental at first, then deliberate. "You are not what I expected, Mark," she said softly. "Neither are you," he answered. Her eyes met his, and something in them broke, an invisible wall crumbling between duty and desire. But before anything more could be said, a sudden flash of lightning plunged the room into darkness. The candles flickered out, and the moment dissolved. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a gray calm over the estate. Eleanor returned to her usual composed self, though her gaze lingered on him longer than before. A few days later, an invitation arrived for another event, a high-profile board meeting where Eleanor's position as chairwoman would be challenged by rival investors.
"You will attend with me," she said firmly. "Appearances matter. And if they attack you," he asked. Her lips curved slightly. "Then you will see why I needed a husband." The day of the meeting, the boardroom buzzed with tension. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the rival investor, a smug man named Caldwell, smirked as he stood to speak. "Mrs. Brooks," he said loudly, "your recent marriage has raised questions about your judgment. Some might say this arrangement compromises your integrity." Murmurs rippled through the room. Mark felt heat rise in his chest, but before he could speak, Eleanor lifted a hand. Her voice was calm, her composure perfect. "My personal life does not require validation from men who cannot balance their own ledgers," she said smoothly. The room went silent. Caldwell's smirk faltered. Mark watched her command the space with quiet power, realizing that beneath her icy surface was a woman who had built her empire alone, piece by piece. When the meeting ended, the applause was genuine. In the car afterward, Mark turned to her. "You did not need me to defend you." "No," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "But I needed you to see that I could." That night, as the mansion lights glowed against the rain-soaked glass. Mark understood something. The woman he had married for survival was teaching him how to fight for dignity. And for the first time, he wanted to protect her, not because of the contract, but because he cared. The days following the board meeting moved in slow, quiet waves. For the first time since their marriage, Eleanor and Mark shared more than silence. They began to eat breakfast together without tension, walking the gardens in the evenings, talking about books, politics, and even laughter, the rarest sound in that mansion. The staff noticed the difference too. The house that had once felt cold began to breathe again. One Sunday afternoon, while tending to the greenhouse, Mark found Eleanor sketching something on a pad of paper. Her hand moved delicately, tracing lines that looked like a garden layout. "I did not know you could draw," he said. She looked up, a little startled. "It was a hobby before the company took over my life." He smiled. "Then you should do it more. You are good at it." She laughed softly. "I doubt that, but maybe I will." The next few weeks unfolded like a quiet awakening.
Eleanor's harsh tone softened. She asked about his mother's health, even arranged for a specialist to visit her hospital at no cost. When Mark thanked her, she waved it off. "Consider it part of the contract," she said, though her eyes betrayed something warmer. But peace rarely lasts long in a house built on secrets. One evening, Mark returned from the university library to find the staff unusually quiet. In the drawing room, Eleanor stood by the fireplace, holding a newspaper. Her jaw was tense, her expression unreadable. "You should sit," she said. He obeyed. She handed him the paper. The headline made his stomach drop. "Billionaire widow marries penniless student." Inside, the scandalous contract of Eleanor Brooks. Beneath it, blurry photos of them at the gala, hand in hand. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Caldwell," she said coldly. "He leaked it. The board will demand a statement tomorrow." Mark clenched his fists. "Then tell them the truth. Tell them it was an arrangement." "I cannot," she said firmly. "It would destroy the foundation's reputation. The children's funding depends on public trust." He looked at her in disbelief. "So you will take the blame alone?" She turned away, staring into the flames. "It is my name on the papers. I can bear it." The next morning, the scandal exploded across every major outlet. Reporters camped outside the estate gates. Eleanor faced the cameras alone, calm as ever, denying rumors but refusing to explain. The board suspended her pending review. By evening, the foundation's accounts were frozen, and her phone would not stop ringing. Mark watched helplessly as she fielded calls, her voice steady even as her world unraveled. When the last call ended, she sank into the chair, her hands trembling slightly. "You should leave," she whispered. "Before this destroys you too." "I am not going anywhere," he said. "You made me part of this when you signed that paper. It was supposed to protect you, not drag you down," she said bitterly. "Maybe protection is not what I need," he replied. "Maybe I need to stand beside you for once." That night, for the first time, he reached for her hand and she did not pull away. Days turned into a blur of meetings, accusations, and headlines. The mansion felt smaller, the walls closing in under the weight of public judgment.
One afternoon, Mark discovered a letter slipped under his door, a threat. "End the marriage, or we will end your career before it begins." He showed it to Eleanor. She looked at it for a long moment, then tore it in half. "They want to scare us," she said. "Do not give them the satisfaction." But late that night, Mark found her sitting alone in the dark, staring at an old photograph of her and her late husband. "Everything I built is slipping away," she whispered. "Maybe I deserve it." "No," he said softly. "You deserve peace." The following morning, he went to meet Caldwell at his downtown office. He demanded to know why the man had leaked the story. Caldwell smirked. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Davis. I just found hers." Mark leaned forward, his voice steady. "You are wrong. You found her limit, and you are about to cross mine." That evening, he came home bruised but calmer. He did not tell Eleanor what had happened, only that Caldwell would not bother them again. She looked at him, eyes narrowing in concern. "What did you do?" I reminded him that not everything is for sale, he said simply. She studied him for a long time before nodding. Maybe you're not the man I married after all. Maybe I never was, he said quietly. Outside, thunder rolled again, the sound echoing through the halls like a warning. The contract had started as protection, but now it was a chain and both of them were beginning to feel its pull tighten. The scandal slowly began to fade from headlines, but the damage lingered. The board suspended Eleanor indefinitely, freezing her access to both the foundation and several corporate assets. The once lively mansion now stood still again, as if holding its breath. Mark tried to keep busy, balancing classes with managing the estate's daily operations, but the weight on Eleanor's shoulders was visible. She stopped attending events, stopped answering calls. She spent hours in the library, staring at old photographs or reading letters from donors who had turned their backs. One afternoon, Mark found her standing by the window, the light of dusk casting long shadows across her face. You should not stand there alone, he said gently. People forget that even statues need rest. She turned, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. I built my life on being unbreakable, Mark.
But I am starting to wonder if that was a mistake. Maybe strength is not about never breaking, he said. Maybe it is about what you do after you do. She looked at him, studying his face. You sound older than you are. Maybe life accelerated the lessons, he replied. That night, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Eleanor came to his study. She was barefoot, her hair slightly undone, her face stripped of the perfect armor she usually wore. I could not sleep, she said. He gestured to the chair by the fire. Neither could I. She sat down, and silence stretched between them, comfortable for once. After a long moment, she asked, Do you regret it? Any of this? I do not, he said honestly. Even if it began as a contract, it gave me purpose. And maybe it gave you a reason to feel again. She laughed softly, the sound fragile. Do not flatter me, Mr. Davis. I am not, he said. I am just telling the truth. Her gaze lingered on him, something flickering in her eyes, something raw, almost tender. You know, she said, her voice low, there was a time I thought affection was a weakness. That caring for anyone meant losing control. But you have shown me that control means nothing without connection. Mark felt his chest tighten. Then let me be that connection, Eleanor. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. She looked down, then back at him, her voice barely a whisper. Do not offer what you cannot keep. He reached out and took her hand. I am not offering anything temporary. For the first time, she did not pull away. The warmth of her hand lingered long after she left the room. Over the next few days, their dynamic changed quietly. They shared meals without formality, walked the gardens together, and once even danced in the empty ballroom to a record she had not played in years. But peace never lasts long in their world. One morning, a black envelope arrived, no name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Eleanor shaking hands with a known political figure tied to corruption years ago. Attached was a note that read, We can make this disappear for a price. Mark found her in the library, the photo trembling slightly in her hand. They are using your past against you, he said. Let me handle this. No, she said quickly. If you interfere, they will come after you next. I do not care, he replied.
You cannot fight this alone. That evening, they met with an investigative journalist whom Mark trusted from university. Together, they gathered evidence proving that Caldwell and several board members had conspired to discredit her. It was dangerous. If exposed prematurely, it could ruin them both. Late that night, Eleanor sat by the fire again, watching the flames twist and burn. If this fails, she said quietly, everything I have left will be gone. Mark sat beside her. Then we fail together. She turned her head slightly. You were supposed to be temporary. So were most of the best things in life, he said softly. Their eyes met, and this time, she did not look away. The firelight flickered across her face, softening the hard lines of power and age into something warm, almost luminous. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the room, the silence between them was electric. Without words, she leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time since the day they met, she allowed herself to be still, to breathe, to feel. Mark closed his eyes, knowing the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, they were walking it together. The contract that once bound them by law was slowly being replaced by something real, fragile, and terrifyingly human. The next week unfolded like a fragile truce. Eleanor and Mark worked quietly with the journalist, collecting files, tracing transactions, and recording every threat that arrived in her mailbox. The evidence was enough to expose Caldwell's entire network, but one mistake could destroy them both. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Mark returned from a meeting downtown with tense news. "They know," he said, closing the study door. "Someone inside the paper must have leaked. Caldwell is moving fast. He plans to file charges against you tomorrow for fraud." Eleanor's face remained calm, but her hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "Then we release everything tonight," she said. "No," he replied. "If we do, they will spin it. We need to wait until the foundation board meets. That is when they will have no choice but to hear the truth." Her eyes met his. "You are playing a dangerous game, Mark." "So are you," he said. That night, the mansion was unusually quiet. A storm brewed outside, and the wind howled through the corridors.
Eleanor sat by the window, lost in thought. When Mark entered, she turned toward him. "You should leave before morning," she said softly. "If this goes wrong, I do not want you caught in it." "I am already caught in it," he answered. "You made me part of this, remember?" She exhaled slowly. "You have changed since the day you walked into that bistro." "Maybe you did too," he said. "Maybe that is what scared them." She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. "If I lose everything tomorrow, what happens then?" "Then we start again," he said. "Not as CEO and law student, not as business partners, but as people." She nodded once, then whispered, "You have a strange way of making me believe in impossible things." The next morning, the board meeting began under flashing cameras and whispers. Caldwell stood at the head of the table, his voice dripping with false authority. "Mrs. Brooks has violated the ethics clause of her late husband's will," he announced. "We move to remove her permanently." Reporters scribbled notes, the room tense with expectation. But before he could continue, Mark rose from his seat. "Before this vote, the board should see what really happened," he said firmly. He placed a folder on the table, dozens of pages of emails, wire transfers, and signatures connecting Caldwell to illegal funding schemes. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Eleanor remained silent, her gaze steady. "You call her corrupt," Mark said, "but she was the only one protecting what this foundation was built for." Caldwell lunged forward, shouting, but security moved in. Within hours, the story broke nationwide. The same headlines that had mocked Eleanor now praised her. "Widow exposes corporate conspiracy, truth restores foundation." By evening, the mansion buzzed with phone calls, apologies, and offers of support. Mark found Eleanor on the balcony, the sunset washing her face in amber light. She looked peaceful, almost fragile. "It is over," he said. "You won." She shook her head. "No, we won. I could not have done it without you." "Then what happens now?" he asked. She looked out over the horizon. "Now, for the first time in years, I do not know. And I think that is a good thing." He smiled. "Uncertainty suits you." She laughed quietly. "Do not get used to it." For a long moment, they stood together in silence, the air heavy with everything unspoken.
The fight was over, but the feelings that had grown in the shadows of the storm were only beginning to surface. The contract that had once defined them no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth they had built between them, something that no paper, no scandal, and no lie could erase. Weeks passed, and calm slowly returned to the Brooks estate. Reporters faded away. Investors regained confidence, and the foundation resumed its work under Eleanor's leadership. But the woman who once ruled every room with calculated precision was no longer the same. The victory had stripped away her armor, revealing something quieter, warmer, and far more human. Mark noticed it in the small things, the way she paused to admire the morning light, how she smiled at the staff, or the way her laughter sounded less rehearsed and more real. One evening, she invited him to the garden for tea, something she had never done before. The air was cool, the scent of roses drifting through the twilight. "You never told me what you planned to do after graduation," she said, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. "I have not decided," he admitted. "Maybe I will take a job, maybe I will travel. But wherever I go, I want to do something that matters." She nodded slowly. "You already have." He looked at her, meeting her steady gaze. "Eleanor, I stayed because I believed in you, not because of a contract." She held his eyes for a moment, then looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then what do you believe in now?" "In us," he said. Silence stretched between them, soft but full of meaning. For once, she did not retreat behind formality. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "The contract ends in a week," she said quietly. "When it does, you'll be free." "Maybe freedom is not what I want," he replied. "Maybe I want you." She froze, torn between reason and feeling, then exhaled. "Mark, I have lived long enough to know love is not a fairy tale. It demands more than emotion, it demands truth." "Then tell me the truth," he said. "Do you still want this to be pretend?" She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "I do not know how to want anything else." That night, neither of them slept. The unspoken tension between them filled the halls of the mansion like a living thing.
At dawn, Eleanor stood on the balcony, watching the sunrise break through silver clouds. Mark joined her, silent at first. "When my husband died," she said softly, "I promised myself I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. That is why I made the rules. That is why I hired you." "And did it work?" he asked. "It did," she said, turning to face him. "Until now." He took a slow breath. "Then let us make new rules." She smiled faintly. "And what would they be?" "Rule 1, he said, stepping closer. "No more pretending." "And Rule 2? If either of us falls, the other does not walk away." Her eyes softened. "That sounds dangerously like forever." "Maybe it is," he said. She studied him for a long heartbeat, then reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You have no idea what you are asking for, Mark." "I know exactly what I am asking for," he said quietly. "A chance to love you without terms, without signatures, without fear." The morning sun spilled across the garden, bathing them both in gold. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the warmth touch her face, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine something fragile but real. She whispered, almost to herself, maybe this was never about contracts at all. Maybe it was about courage. Mark smiled. "Then let us be brave together." The wind rustled through the roses, carrying the faint scent of new beginnings, as two hearts once bound by paper finally began to write their own story. The final week of their contract arrived quietly, without ceremony. The mansion felt different now, alive again, filled with light and music and the scent of fresh flowers. The legal papers that once sat between them had been tucked away, forgotten, replaced by shared mornings, unspoken glances, and laughter that came easily. But still, the end loomed. On the morning the contract expired, Mark found Eleanor in the garden, standing among the roses she had once trimmed alone. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that promised peace after too many storms. "It is done," she said softly, without turning. "You are free." Mark stepped closer. "Free from what?" "From me," she replied, her voice steady but faint. "From the rules, the expectations, the arrangement. You can go back to your life, Mark. You deserve that." He smiled sadly. "And what about you? What do you deserve?" She hesitated.
"A quiet life," I suppose. One where I no longer need to pretend. He shook his head. Then let me be part of that quiet life. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. Why would you stay? You have seen every flaw I try to hide. Because those flaws are what make you real, he said. And because you taught me that love is not a transaction, it is a choice. For a moment, she looked as if she might cry, but she only whispered, and what if I am too old to start again? Then let me remind you how to, he said softly. Later that evening, the foundation hosted a small gala this time, not for publicity, but to celebrate its rebirth. Donors, staff, and friends filled the hall with warmth instead of gossip. Eleanor stood at the podium, thanking those who had stood by her. When she finished, she turned to find Mark waiting near the stage, holding a small velvet box. The crowd hushed as he walked forward. Mrs. Brooks, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, our contract may have ended, but I am here to propose a new one without clauses, without signatures, without expiration. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring. Will you stay with me, not because of duty, but because of choice? The room was silent. Eleanor stared at him, the weight of her past and the hope of her future colliding in that single breath. Then she smiled a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. Yes, she said quietly. For once, I choose not the safe path, but the true one. Applause erupted around them, soft and genuine. Later that night, under the glow of the garden lights, they danced barefoot on the wet grass. The air was cool, the world finally still. Do you ever think about how strange it all was? Mark asked. Every day, she said with a laugh. A contract that began in desperation ended in love. The best kind of mistake, he murmured. She rested her head against his chest. No, she whispered. Not a mistake, just destiny in disguise. As the music drifted through the night and the roses swayed gently in the breeze, the mansion that had once been silent finally felt like a home. Two people who had started as strangers under a rainstorm now stood together beneath the stars, no longer bound by paper, but by the quiet, undeniable truth that love, once real, needs no contract at all.